to introduce tonight's speaker. Help me welcome Liz H. from New York.
Hi guys. My name is Liz and I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is July 21st, 1995, and my home group is Young and Wise. We meet on Friday nights at 8 o'clock on 1st and 1st in Manhattan. If you're ever in the neighborhood, stop on by. Aw, thanks, Wisconsin. You're going to have to bear with me a little bit. Of course, about 3 days ago, I got incredibly ill. So I've been in bed trying to get better so I could share this evening with you guys today. I would like to thank the host committee for asking me to be here with you. It has been an honor to watch them go through this process over the last year. I served on the Portland host committee in 2003 for ICYPAA, and that experience changed my life, so thank you. All right, so what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. I grew up in California, and in San Francisco and other parts of the Bay Area. Hell yeah. I have a pretty big family, 5 brothers, a sister, a mom, and a dad. I fall kind of awkwardly in the middle. My brother above me in age is 13 years older, and the brother below me in age is 7 years younger. So for most of my childhood, it was as if I was a single child. My family, I loved them dearly, and they did the best that they could. But from a very young age, I felt alone and not a part of. My mother was obsessed with education, and from about 2 years old on, I wasn't allowed to spend time with my peers, really. She gave me a lot of phenomenal opportunities. I had Spanish tutors and piano lessons and voice lessons, and like you name the extracurricular activity, I was involved in it. But what that also meant was, in addition to already feeling like I just wasn't a part of this world, I didn't have anybody my own age to spend time with. That didn't really work out so well for this alcoholic. When I was 9 years old, we moved to the Napa Valley in California. And really? There's people from Napa here? Awesome. ICYPAA, hell yeah. So I was 9 years old. We moved. My younger brothers had been born at this point. Oh, one thing that I feel like is important to mention. So there's all the peer stuff going on. There's also some major issues going on in my family. From a very young age, my mother felt incredibly threatened by my existence. And when I was about 7 years old, they openly discussed in front of me putting me into an apartment with nannies because I caused so much conflict between my mother and my father. So really young, like, I just didn't fit anywhere, you know, like my parents were parents that had conversations like that in front of their child, and like I couldn't relate. Nobody else I knew was going through things like that, you know. So anyways, that was part of it. I didn't fit in with my peers, I didn't fit in with my family, I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin, and I was terrified of everything around me. I don't know if any of you can relate to that, but so we move. When we moved, we didn't have enough money to continue to have nannies and caregivers, so At 9 years old, I became the sole caregiver for my two younger brothers. I did all the cooking, all the cleaning. I changed their diapers. I took them to nursery school. And then I went off myself to elementary school, picked them up after school, and the whole thing continued. On the weekends, however, I pretty much did whatever I wanted. My parents were pretty checked out. My mom is a school teacher and pretty obsessive about most anything she does in her life. So she was gone from about 6 in the morning until about 8 or 9 at night, and my father traveled. So really it was just me and my younger brothers, and on the weekends I took off. The first friend that I made in the Napa Valley was this girl, Audrey, and her parents were also checked out. Different reasons than my family. They were involved in drugs and drinking and were in and out of jail on and off, and she and her younger brother had been in foster care on and off, and she became my best friend. One weekend in the beginning of my 5th grade year, I was at her house, and we decided that it was a really good idea to grab the 5th of vodka out of the cabinet and the 2-liter bottle of Pepsi and mix them together and drink them until they were gone. And it ruled. It changed my life, you know. All of that fear, all of the insecurity, all of the self-hatred, all of the doubt, it went away, it vanished, and I felt a part of something greater than myself. And I didn't give a shit about any of it anymore, you know? And I chased that every day from that point until I got sober. In California, I'm assuming this is still the case, but liquor is sold at grocery stores, which rules. So every day after school in the 5th grade, I'd go to Safeway and I'd steal a bottle of liquor and a pack of cigarettes and pick my brothers up, take them home, put them to bed, get wasted in my house, and smoke. Smoking was the same as drinking. Like, I was walking to school one day and there was a Marlboro Light 100 laying on the sidewalk, and I picked it up, and I've been smoking for 20 years. That's how I do everything. You know what I mean? Like, there's no middle of the road for me. Like, none at all. So my drinking progressed pretty quickly. I always knew that it wasn't normal what I was doing. When it came time for me to do my first step, I had no problem admitting I was alcoholic. You know, the part that was hard for me was admitting unmanageability, because I just didn't know any other way to live, you know. So I'm drinking as often as I can, almost every day, if not every day, at 9 years old, and was pretty content doing that alone or with Audrey until I was 11. When I was 11 years old, I had been diagnosed with a bone disorder from the time I could walk, basically. And it was time to take some action on that disorder if I was going to be able to continue to walk and not be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. So I had a bunch of surgery when I was 11, and I was in and out of hospitals for a number of years, and spent 2 years in a wheelchair. But while all of that sucked and was incredibly painful, it did come with an unlimited prescription of Vicodin. So, you know, I took pills, and I still managed to drink. I don't know how I did. You know, like, where there is a will, there is a way, because wheelchair-bound and 11 and totally fucked up on pills, I still managed to, like, get a hold of booze, you know? By the time I was 12 or 13 in there, I was so dependent on substances that I couldn't function anymore. Out of the wheelchair, I had a newfound freedom. I could get in and out of my house when I wanted. You know, walking is helpful for that. I pretty much just never came home after that. As soon as I could walk again, I was out. I started hanging out with people that I shouldn't have been hanging out with. You know, those like skeezy, dirty 30-year-old dudes that hang out with 11 and 12-year-old girls, getting them fucked up. I don't know if any of you have either been the skeezy dude or been the 12-year-old kid. But yeah. The Napa Valley definitely has its fair share. And that's who I ran with. You know, I ran with people who were 20 years older than me, 30 years older than me, who had absolutely no problem getting a 12-year-old high off her ass. And I drank still every day. I started going to school less and less. I became pretty violent. I violently defended my right to drink as much as I wanted. Anybody that seemed like they were getting in the way of that, like, I would fight you. If I couldn't figure out how to manipulate or lie my way out of a situation, I would fight you. And, you know, so I got in a lot of fistfights. I started getting in trouble. And I would just, it didn't really matter what I did. The amount of rage that was going on inside me could not be quelled by anything, by booze, by drugs, by hitting anybody. But I tried, you know, and my little brothers got the brunt of a lot of that. One of the most painful things I've had to make amends for in my sobriety is to my baby brothers. I was the kind of older sister, I became the kind of older sister that would get loaded or just be pissed because I couldn't get loaded and pick up my little brother and throw him down the stairs and laugh when he cried and, you know, sprained his ankle and had bruises all over his body. I became the kind of person that would put cigarettes out on a 4-year-old child. None of it mattered, you know? Like, the only thing that mattered to me was getting outside of myself and numbing the pain that was going on inside. And I started doing more desperate things as time went on. I prostituted myself for substances. I mean, you name it, I did it. I went so low and lost my mind so intensely that by the time I was 13, I had already spent time in Napa State Hospital. I had been in pretty much every psychiatric institution up and down the Napa Valley through Santa Rosa to Napa, sometime in Kaiser and Oakland and in San Francisco. I had been arrested countless times, and I was just totally not in touch with reality anymore. You know, I spent most of my time living in a graveyard. I mean, dead people don't fucking talk to you, you know? So I moved into this mausoleum. It was the Robert Mondavi family mausoleum. I don't know if any of you have consumed their wine, but they provided me with shelter for about a year and a half. And I just lived there, you know, like I heard voices and I saw things and I was desperately alone in this world. Pretty much every day I woke up, I wanted to die. I just was lost, you know, and I didn't really know that there was another way I could be living. I was so paralyzed by feelings, you know. I mean, it was just like fear and rage and insecurity and doubt, and I put alcohol in my body, and when that stopped working, I was lost. So I'll speed this up to sobriety. So I was living in a cemetery. I had made a decision to overdose on heroin. I had never done drugs before, and yes, this is in a meeting, but this is a serious part of my story. So anyways, my plan of suicide was to get a needle and shoot a bunch of heroin until I died. And I had the drugs, and I was going out into the woods to be by myself and commit suicide for real this time, you know. Like, it had been like, this was maybe my 30th attempt at this point. But being the sick teenage brain that I had, I went home to tell my parents to go fuck themselves, basically, and tell my brothers I was sorry. And they weren't home. So I sat down on the couch and I passed out. And when I came to, there were people there to take me away. And I had been arrested so many times, the court system got a little tired of seeing me, and I had actually run away from doing about 2 years of juvenile hall, and a decision had been made that instead of going to juvenile hall, that they would send me to a rehabilitation center in the middle of nowhere in Montana. And so when I woke up, like, that's what was happening with my life, unbeknownst to me. So they had gone through all my things and set aside the clothes that I would need, and I was escorted to the airport and brought to Montana. The first program I was in was 3 months. It was like over the summer. It was a placement program. And I mean, I had been diagnosed sociopathic with schizophrenic tendencies. I mean, like every diagnosis in the book, like someone had tried to pin on me, and I was just alcoholic. But whatever, that manifests in a lot of different ways, you know. And so I was in this placement program, and after 3 months of doing absolutely nothing, they decided that I was not ready to re-enter society. I know, that is shocking. But, you know, like attempted murder, violent offenders, minor possession, you know, I mean, like you name it, I had it. And so yeah, they weren't really all that stoked about letting me back out into the real world, so they sent me to a lockdown facility in Condon, Montana, and I was there for 2 years. The people that ran that facility were 5 members of Alcoholics Anonymous, and those people saved my life. It was November. It was around my birthday, and I hadn't done anything. I mean, in addition to my many other issues, I had been active in an eating disorder for quite a few years, and they had me on a food plan that I refused to eat. I would vomit all over the table every single meal. I wouldn't talk to anybody about anything. You asked me what color the sky was, I would tell you it was green. Like, it didn't matter. I was full of shit, and I couldn't tell the truth to save my ass at that point, you know. And so I was in this facility, and I had been for a while, and around November they invite my parents to visit, and my parents and the 5 heads of the treatment facility sit down, and they look at me and they say, if you don't start doing some work around here, you can finish your time in jail. Like, we don't want you. You can go live that life. You've been given this opportunity, and you know, you're not doing anything for it. And up until that moment, when I was faced with those 7 people sitting in front of me saying these words to me, I would have told you in a heartbeat I would have taken juvenile hall. Like, I had no interest in living my life any other way than I had been. But for whatever reason in that moment, I looked around at the other people in the room, and you guys had light in your eyes. And I thought back on all the stories that I had heard since I had been there, and chose in that moment to believe that maybe I could have that life too. And so they gave me 30 days to start doing my step work, and if I hadn't have started, I would have gone to juvenile hall, but I did. I asked this woman, Deb, for help, and she sat down with the big book and tried to take me through that. But you have to understand that at this point, like, I hadn't been to school in a couple of years. I can't tell you the last time I read a book. The last English class I took was, you know, books on tape, like for, you know, mentally slow, challenged people. And I could not read this book. It didn't make any sense to me at all. So we practiced reading, period, for a little bit first, and then after about a month, she sat down and we went page by page through the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And yeah, I mean, it changed my world. Before that point, I had read, which we have not read at the beginning of these meetings, but we hear it at almost every meeting we go to, from How It Works in Chapter 5. And the furthest I could ever get was, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. And I stopped there. I couldn't listen to the rest because I believed for a long time that I was one of those people. And one day I was able to articulate that fear to Deb, and she looked at me and she said, do you believe that I once felt that way too? And she had shared with me some pieces of her story, and I looked at her and I said, yes, I can. I can believe that there was a time when you once believed that as well. And she's like, okay. So we got the alcoholic part down, right? And like, we've discussed how your life is unmanageable. You're clear with that now, right? And I'm like, all right, like, yeah, okay, talking to dead people, not normal. I can do better than that, maybe, hopefully. And she was like, all right, well, why don't we flip back to the spiritual appendix in the back of the book? And I'm going to read that for you tonight, for those of you who have not heard it. For me, it's always good to hear it again, and I read it often. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's on page 570 in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It says, most of us think this awareness of a power greater than ourselves is the essence of spiritual experience. Our more religious members call it God consciousness. Most emphatically, we wish to say that any alcoholic capable of honestly facing his problems in the light of our experience can recover, provided he does not close his mind to all spiritual concepts. He can only be defeated by an attitude of intolerance or belligerent denial. We find that no one need have difficulty with the spirituality of this program. Willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery, but these are indispensable. There is a principle which is bar against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. If it wasn't for that part of the Big Book, I don't know if I would have made it today. I could not swallow God. There were so many things about this program that I just thought, like, I was worse, you know? Like, AA couldn't help me. I was too screwed up for you guys. And, you know, part of that was like, I'm only 14, you know? Like, I'm this screwed up and I'm 14, and I think you can't help me, you know? Like, that's where I was. I had very little, I was struggling daily with having the hope to even move forward in life, you know? And Deb was like, just, if you don't believe it for yourself, believe it for me. And I was like, okay, I can do that. She's like, now let's try a day at a time, not lying. Let's start there. And I was like, all right, I can do that. I can try anyways. And it took me a long time to make it through 24 whole hours without lying once. You know, like, that was practice. And then getting on to, like, emotional honesty was a totally different, like, beyond me at that point. So yeah, that was my second step. I came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore me to sanity by believing in her experience in practicing honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. That's all I had to do. Step 3 is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. And it was more of that. She's like, okay, like, so by doing step 3, you start the action of writing step 4, which is made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And she was like, can you do that? Can you start writing? And I was like, I guess, just tell me what to do. 360-something pages later, I finished my 4th step. I was thorough. Once I got started, you know, the action of writing it all down it felt good. Like, it felt good to write down all the people I was pissed off at, and getting through it all. And the longer I took, like, the longer it was before I had to tell her any of that information, you know? So It was like 9 months of four-step writing for me. It was a novel by the time I finished. So yeah, I finished my first inventory, and I believed that they were going to ask me to go after I told her everything that was on that inventory, you know? I thought I was screwed if I ever sat down and actually read the whole thing. But Deb looked at me and she asked me to trust her, and she sat down with me and we went page by page until it was done. And when I was finished, and like this took a number of, you know, I mean it was 360 pages, it took a while. I looked up and she had tears in her eyes, and she told me that she loved me. That was not the response I was expecting at all. It was the first time ever in my life that I had experienced unconditional love, and that came from you, you know? Like, that came from one alcoholic reaching out their hand to another alcoholic who believed their life was hopeless and totally deserving to be thrown away. And she loved me anyway. So I finished the 5th step, and we got to the 6th step, which is we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And I didn't have a hard time with the defects part. You know, like I was pretty convinced I was like worthless. But what she made me do was sit down, and for every defect, she helped me write an asset. And she helped me look at all of the things that perhaps if I was not in that moment in time, someday I could be. And that hurt, actually. Like, that was painful, you know? Like, I had this set of beliefs about myself for so long, and she was challenging every single one of them. And I just cried. For a long time, I just sat there and looked at her and cried. And, you know, it was terrifying to think that one day I could believe that I was a person of worth, and I could be a person of dignity and grace, you know. Step 7, which is humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. I feel like we have to read it, because we're going to read it before the meeting. And there was a bunch of people here within the first 30 days, which is amazing. Congratulations, you guys. So step 7, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. I did. I went out into the woods, I got on my knees, and I talked with God for the first time. I had no idea who that was or what that was. I just kind of like looked up at the sky and read all of this stuff that Deb had helped me write, and thanked him or her or it or whatever it is for bringing me the first little glimmer of peace that I had felt ever. We got to my 8th step, we sat down, we looked at my 4th step, I wrote out all of the people that I had harmed, and I became willing to make amends to them. There were a lot of people who were not on my 4th step. I had hurt a lot of people that I wasn't resentful at. I had no emotional response to, and it took me a long time to get there. But we sat down and we made that list. And then they let me out for 2 weeks. The nice thing about that was I wasn't able to sit in fear around making those amends. You know, like I had a number of people I had to make amends to. I went back to California. I set up appointments with all of them. I went back to all of the, you know, like businesses I'd stolen from, and you know, just all of the people that I had harmed, and I had gone through each and every single one and talked about how, you know, like what the best way to go about saying I was wrong, how can I make this right? And had that conversation with all of them. Had 2 weeks. Got them done, went back to lockup. 10, 11, and 12, which are continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. 10, 11, and 12 became a daily practice for me. You know, every day I sat down and I wrote an inventory of my day, and every day I got on my knees and I prayed and I thanked God for keeping me sober, and I asked Him to help me be the woman that He wanted me to be. And went through my day, and eventually 2 years had passed and it was time for me to go, and I was so freaked out. This place that I felt like it was a death sentence to go to was telling me to go, and I didn't want to go. You guys are scary out there in the real world, and I was not into it. It had become a safe place for me, and I had found happiness in some amount of peace for the first time in my life, and I did not want to leave. The day that I left, Deb, the woman who had taken me through the 12 steps, she looked at me and she said, "I don't think you're going to make it." She's like, "I just don't, I think you're going to die an alcoholic death, and I think that's what's ahead for you, And totally screwed up of her, really. I can't imagine saying that to a sponsee who's about to go out into the real world, but it was actually the perfect words to say to me. I was terrified that I would just fall down drunk and throw my entire life away and go back to the hell that I had been living before. Now that I knew that there was another way, I did not want to go back there. And so she said, "You need to go find a home group. You need to go find Alcoholics Anonymous, and you need to reach your hand out and you need to ask for help, just like you did with me that day in November. And you need to get a service commitment, and you need to show up. And you need to do what you can do to be the family member that you've learned how to be through working the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So go, do that." And I did. My home group in the Napa Valley was Joe's group. It meets on Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock. If you're ever in St. Helena, it's still at the Episcopal Church. And I was the youngest person by about 30 years. Which there were mixed responses to that. Mostly I did not feel particularly welcome. There were a couple of members that flat out told me I wasn't welcome. But there were a couple women who reached out their hands and took me under their wing. One of them was this woman, Valerie, and my first exposure to general service was through this woman. She had been to a California area meeting and came back, and there had been a shout out for young people to take meeting into treatment centers all up and down the Napa Valley, and there are all these youth treatment centers popping up and nobody to take meetings to them. And she asked if I would do that with her, and I said yes, of course. And that kind of started my passion for general service. It broadened my understanding for how Alcoholics Anonymous works, because it opened my eyes to our service structure. And we had a lot of fun. She's nuts. I love the woman dearly, but she is crazy. We just drive around and smoke cigarettes and go to all these meetings in the middle of nowhere, and we had a great time. She was in her 40s and I was 16, and we were two peas in a pod. Our emotional maturity level, I think, was right about on par. She's so much fun, that woman. So we cruised around and we did that, and all of a sudden a year had passed and I needed to get the hell out of California. I didn't really have a plan, My parents really wanted me to stay home. They felt like I owed them this life. They were not excited about me being in Alcoholics Anonymous until I had about 10 years sober. I used to get grounded for going to AA meetings, and yeah. They wanted me to go away and come back fixed, and when that didn't happen, they wanted this life that is total fiction. And I needed to get out of there or I was going to lose it. So I hopped on a Greyhound bus and I went north, and I ended up in Ashland, Oregon, and went to Southern Oregon University for a year. And I had kind of a similar, the first experience, I guess, not really being able to find Alcoholics Anonymous. There weren't a lot of meetings in the Napa Valley, but there were some, and people helped me get around for the most part. But I ended up in Ashland, and I had called the intergroup office a number of times, and they kept sending me to these places where meetings didn't exist, and all of a sudden it had been 3 months, and I was out of my mind and hadn't found an AA meeting yet. And I was walking across campus, and there was a circle and triangle sticker on the back of someone's car, and I wrote, it was like a 6 or 7 page letter of all of my bullshit. And I put it in her windshield, and I was like, so I need help. Can you help me, please? And this amazing woman, Lori, picked me up, and she took me to the Medford Alano Club. And those people loved me. They loved me back to sanity. And I got a sponsor. I started working the steps. I got involved in service. And 9 months later, I had to get the hell out of there, too. Turns out I don't do so well with small towns. We're not, yeah, it doesn't work out. So again, like, I piled into a car. I had no idea where I was going or what I was doing, and I just went north. You know, like, I knew I didn't want to be back in California, and I didn't really know where else to go. So I ended up in Portland, Oregon. And, yeah. I get all moved in. Like, my first couple of days there, I walk over to the Northwest Alano Club and into the basement, and into the Friday night Young People's Meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in Portland, Oregon, which now meets, I'm gonna, here's meetings to go to all across America. 28th and Harrison at 8 o'clock on Friday nights if you're ever in Portland, Oregon. Anyways, at that point, it was at the Alano Club, and I walk into the basement, and it's dark and dingy, and it's all you guys. Like, you guys are there. I didn't know you were out there, Like, I thought I was the only sober teenager in the world. I was pretty convinced. And I walked into the basement, and it was full of you, and you scared me to death. I didn't know how to have relationships with people my own age. Like, I had never had to do that before, But again, I mean, same thing. I went to the front of the room after the meeting was over, and I was like, hi, I'm Liz. I'm new. I just moved here. And the woman who was secretarying the meeting at the time was also named Liz, and she hands me the treasury, and she says, awesome, you're the new treasurer. So immediately I got hooked up with service, and I got a sponsor, and at that point I was really resentful at all of you, like, boys came up and flirted with me. I didn't know what to do with that. Like, I just got pissed. Like, I didn't know how to have friends, And my sponsor looked at me and she was like, well, you can either put some effort into creating the fellowship you crave, or you can leave Young People's AA. It's up to you. And she was involved in bidding for ICYPAA. And so I went to my first business meeting for ICYPAA. It was awesome. That was an amazing experience, Like, when I got sober, like, I didn't know how to shower every day, Like, I didn't know how to brush my teeth. I certainly didn't know how to balance a checkbook. I had no idea what the hell you guys were talking about, or what, like, a hotel contract? What the fuck? Events? Like, why would you do that? Why would you try to, I don't know. I was the loner, Like, I didn't know why it was important to, like, build relationships with other people. And you guys taught me that. I met my best friend in the whole wide world in the rooms of ICYPAA bidding. She's sitting in the front row up here. She was my first friend, really, like, ever. We're like the same age, we're both girls. It was, And we were angry. We used to cruise around Portland in this beat-up old pickup truck listening to punk rock and just being mad at the world. And it was awesome. It was awesome to be able to share that with somebody else. And I learned a lot, Like, another thing my sponsor suggested was that I become a general service representative of my home group. And I was already the treasurer of one, but I'd been going to this other meeting, and GSR became available, and I stood and was elected. And that started my love affair with general service for sure. I was involved in Oregon area service for at least 8 years, I don't know, a while. And I loved every minute of it. I love that every single one of us has a voice in this fellowship, you know? Every single one of you has a say in what happens with Alcoholics Anonymous. That's so powerful, you know? So I got involved in ICYPAA. It was amazing. I was doing all these things. I had traveled somewhat before this point, and a friend of mine looked at me one day, and I had been obsessed. I had fallen in love with the country of Russia. Now that may seem really random, but I had gone once when I was 17, and I fell in love with everything Russian. And when I was 20, a friend of mine looked at me and he was like, well, then move there. And I was like, yeah, okay. So I did. I moved to the middle of, I think, nowhere in Russia. There's a little town called Vladimir. It's about 4 hours east of Moscow. And I was in a very similar situation to being in Ashland. You know, like, I didn't speak Russian. You know, why do that when you're... You know. I moved to a town where really nobody spoke English. And there was no Alcoholics Anonymous. I went with a couple of Grapevine subscriptions and some speaker tapes and my big book, and Live Journal was happening back then. I did a lot of talking through that. I don't know if any of you remember that. Yeah, Live Journal. Why are you excited about that? I don't know. And I had a little bit of an internet connection, was able to keep in touch sporadically with some people, but for the most part moved to Russia in the middle of nowhere. And what happened for me was I found some Russian drunks, and we started an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Yeah, I finally, after like 3 or 4 months, I found this one meeting. Yeah. It was run by this, I'm sure he's a lovely man, but it was basically, he sat in front of a room full of people, and he, there were no big books, there were no steps, there were no 12 and 12s, there were no traditions, but yet he continued to call himself Alcoholics Anonymous, and he sat in front of the room, and he invited guest doctors who talked about pills you could take, and if you drank again, you'd die. And he talked about like all of the ways that he thought that one could stay sober. And of course, nobody was staying sober. So after one of those meetings, these 2 lovely young men, Soroja and Soroja, they had the same name, it was very convenient, came up to me and asked me for help. I was like, all right, in my very broken, like 3 words of Russian that I knew at this point, we agreed, you know, like to sit down, and we took a train into Moscow and visited the General Service Office in Moscow, and we picked up big books in Russian, and I had my big book in English, and we sat down big book to big book and went through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And those 2 men kept me sober, you know. Eventually there was a meeting, maybe 10 or 15 people came regularly. We met twice a week. One of them went out and found a youth narcotics center that we could bring meetings into, and we started doing that. And as far as I know, they're both still sober today, and that meeting is still there. When I went back a few years later, it was thriving. You know, there were 30 or 40 people in attendance that still met twice a week. And many other meetings had kind of sprung up in its midst. And they sat down and they're like, okay, now can we do the same thing with the traditions? Because we don't get it. And we did. We took a Russian 12 and 12 and an English 12 and 12, and we sat down and we went through tradition by tradition. And yeah, it was a beautiful thing. then I came back, and luckily enough, Portland had just been awarded ICYPAA, so I joined the host committee. It's nice, you know. Yeah. Yeah, it was amazing, that experience. When ICYPAA was over, I felt lost, you know. I don't know if any of you can relate to this, but I have a tendency to go to conferences and get so high on sobriety and like building these relationships with people and learning all these stories, and you know, like there's so many miracles in this room, you know. And then the conference is over and I am tired and feel alone and don't know what to do with myself, and it can be intense, you know. So hosting the conference was like that on steroids. It was amazing. It was so, yeah, it was such a high hosting ICYPAA in Portland. It was an experience filled with gratitude and hope for me. And it ended and I didn't really know what to do anymore. You know, I felt like I had lost my place in AA. What I decided to do was go back to my home group and get involved in service work there again. And at that point, the Friday night meeting had dwindled to maybe 10 people. I don't know, it was very, very small. And all of us that had served on the host committee, for the most part, got back involved in that meeting. And what are there, like, someone from Portland helped me out, 120 now in attendance there. We got super involved in general service. We started helping out our area. We started helping out and taking meetings to communities in Idaho and Roseburg and wherever, like all throughout rural parts of Oregon, where kids were dying of this disease, you know, like they didn't have hope. There weren't other people who were getting sober young there, and we brought dances and speaker meetings and did all of these things and re-energized our community and found purpose again. So I highly recommend that to anybody who is a part of this conference or has been bidding for conferences for a while. You know, like life will change again. But what I've learned about staying sober is that as long as I show up to AA and I put my hand out for the alcoholic who still suffers, everything is going to be okay. What time is it? How much time am I supposed to have for? Till 10? Okay. So I'm 10 minutes late already. I'll wrap this up, I guess. So through my involvement in area service, I just want to share about this real quick because it has been another like huge gift that I've gotten from Alcoholics Anonymous. Through my involvement in general service, one day I was sitting at an area assembly and the delegate in the chair looked at me and made an announcement about this position for appointed committee member. I didn't know what they were talking about, but they stared at me and came up to me after the assembly and were like, "You need to apply for this." So I filled out this application. I didn't really know what I was doing. I've just learned to do what I'm told in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know what I mean? Like, my sponsor, my service sponsor, trusted friend tells me to do something. I pretty much do it at this point, you know? Like, my ideas are no good on their own. So I filled out this piece of paper and I mailed it in, and I got a phone call. And this lovely woman, Adrienne, called and she said, "So we would like you to come and interview for the position of appointed committee member for the Trustees Committee on Literature." I was like, "What?" Yeah, but I have no idea what I'm doing, really. So I made some phone calls and asked around to figure out what exactly it was that I was interviewing for, and I still didn't really understand. But I flew to New York and I sat down to one of the most terrifying interviews I have ever been in ever in my life. You know, it was a room full of all these people that I had immense love and respect for their service to Alcoholics Anonymous, and they sat down and they asked me questions about my professional life and about my service work that I've done in IA and you know, just all sorts of things. And I left that room and I called a friend of mine and I was like, what do I do if AA rejects me? You know, like I don't really still know what I'm doing, but what do I do if they call and say no? And the next day they called and said, congratulations, we would love it if you would come serve as appointed committee member for the Trustees Committee on Literature. So for the last 4 years, I've had that privilege. You know, I've gotten to, before I moved to New York, I got to come here 4 times a year for board meetings and sit down with a committee of phenomenal people and talk about how to better serve the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous through literature. You know, like listen to what you guys thought about the literature that we have to offer and, you know, talk about how we can serve you guys better, like through our pamphlets and through our basic text. And yeah, like, are you kidding me? Like, do you remember that I was the 14-year-old girl living in a cemetery talking to dead people, and you want me to come do what for you? Like, really? It blew my mind. And I have learned so much about humility. And again, one more time, about showing up for the fellowship that has given me so much, you know. I'm sure you guys all want to dance now, and so I will close it. I know we're going to say the Serenity Prayer, but one of my favorite reminders in AA is the responsibility statement. So I think I'm going to close with that. What AA has taught me is that I am responsible. When anyone, anywhere, reaches out for help, I want the hand of AA always to be there. And for that, I am responsible. Thank you for keeping me sober tonight.